if you're elsewhere, the online programs are certainly easy to connect to. I encourage you to subscribe to .org community for more live and educational programming and to fulfill your annual CAE, that's Certified Association Executive requirements in one place. So we do have an upcoming event, or two of them here that we'd like to talk about. One is our next month's webinar, which is Tuesday, July 31st at 11:30 Central, and it's going to feature Clark Quinn. And if you haven't seen his new book, Mythbusters, you should pick it up on Amazon. It's got some fantastic illustrations, and it's really actually very humorous. So I highly recommend it. And if you don't want to pick up the book, attend the webinar on Tuesday, July 31st. Another exciting event that's actually being co-sponsored by Org Community and WebCourseWorks is a reception during the ASAE, which is the American Society of Association Executives. The Association Executives Association, so to speak. And basically ASAE is a very large conference or convention. It's happening in Chicago at McCormick Place, August 18th to the 21st. And we have a reception on Sunday night of that weekend. Essentially, the conference starts on that Sunday, and Sunday and Monday are the big days. And the reception is Sunday night at the London House. So I encourage you to take a look at that. You're welcome to come as a guest of WebCourseWorks, and we can provide you with information on how to register for that if you send us an email. So our guest speaker today is a dear friend of mine, and he's been, I guess, the biggest thing that I like to say about Clark Aldridge is that he is a philosopher and a practitioner, which is an interesting combination. And he really works very, very hard at being both. I met him years ago. He did speak at eLearning conferences at one time in his life, and he was a great session to attend. I like to also say about Clark that he was one of the pioneers in the 90s as far as writing about learning by doing. And he was I think he really cut his teeth on leadership simulation that was built in the 90s. And the books, he's a very prolific writer, and the books that he published were really the foundation for a lot of academic writings in this century. Now, he is not an academic, and he's probably no longer cited because the academics like to cite other academics. But when it comes to game learning theory and such, Clark was a pioneer. Now he's into short sims, and he has written an ebook called Short Sims, a Game Changer. We're going to send you the link, the online link to that book after the webinar because it goes into depth as to what he's talking about. So Clark, please take it over.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It really is an absolute pleasure to be here. Something I've been looking forward to for a while. I'm going to be a little geeky here at times. I'm unfortunately, that's my own temperament in this area. But this is, of everything I've ever done professionally, this is the most exciting. I think this culminates years and years and years of research, of success, of frustration, of trying to figure out a way to make interactive content doable. And as John said, when I started off, my vision of interactive content was more like a pretty high-end computer game, and that was my first model. And I built some simulations that had that framework, and they were very successful. They could, they tested very well. They proved themselves well, both in the marketplace and in results. But it was not really what the market wanted. at a deeper level. And sort of the more game-like things are, the more time-consuming, in a lot of cases, the more frustrating, the more brittle they are, the more technology-dependent they are. And so I've been working really hard to try to figure out a better model than that, one that was more that was easier to modify, easier to change, easier to build, and more people could do them. And so short sims is sort of the next generation of my own thinking of an approach to interactive content that meets a lot more needs than sort of the high-end computer game like stuff. So again, it's a real pleasure to be here to explain it. The thing about it is that it really is important to me to show it. It's not a very satisfying thing to just talk about it. And now, so sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay, so sorry. I'm still getting used to some of these controls, and I apologize for it. All right, so let's start off with, I'd like to show you an example of one of my short sims. This is teaching. This is co-sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it's teaching community college students about demand. And so it's integrated into a textbook, which is nice. And so students will be reading a textbook, and suddenly they'll sort of get to this. This is alongside videos and audio and diagrams. So that's one thing I really like about short sims, is they can be embedded into educational material. It doesn't require a separate loadout. It doesn't require people to leave their environment and hop in. So here it is. We have a coach. And again, I'm a huge fan of coach characters. They set the tone, especially those who are going to be a little helpful. And so this coach is not, it's not going to be mean. He's not going to, yell at you. He's there to sort of be your friend, to collaborate with you. And so in this case, consider a food truck that's selling drinks. And, you can kind of tease them a little bit and say, wouldn't that be a beverage truck? But say no. So you have the ability to lower and raise prices of the drinks sold. I'm sorry. In this case, sorry, hold on. So this is another one of the short sim frameworks is the ability to gently pull people in. And so this is only a multiple choice. This is only a multiple choice example. So, there's nothing complicated about the interface here, but you have the ability to lower and raise the prices of the drinks sold. So right now it's 50 cents. We're going to raise it to $1.50. You see down below here, there's the 1, do nothing, 2, raise the price of the drinks by 50 cents. So, it's a very gentle way of getting people into interactivity, but also they can see, hey, I'm actually interacting with this thing. I'm actually changing the world. So I'm going to keep raising the price. We're going to throw in some customers here. And again, this is on demand curve. So we have 5 customers at price $1.50. And they also snuck in the demand curve down below. What's nice about that is it kind of has the same framework as a mini map in like a racing game or a strategic map in a first-person shooter. It's it's there. It provides some very invaluable information, but I'm not really making a big deal about it. So I'm going to so I can learn more about the chart, but I'm going to keep doing, see what happens when you raise $1.50 to $2.50. I'm going to raise the price. Okay, a person walks away. It's all very intuitive. And part of the real joy of short sims is it's not really super exciting. It's just sort of almost, oh yeah, that's sort of how information should be presented. So I'm going to keep raising the price here. I'm going to lose some more customers. I'm going to reduce the price now to $1.50, get my customers back. So now in a very short time, you've in a very self-intuitive way. One of the other things about short sims that I strive for in the design is almost you sort of teach yourself. I'm not explaining to you a whole lot here. The words are very, very minimal by design. I mean, every edit process, I get rid of words. But the notion is constantly streamlining it. So now, again, in a very intuitive way, you sort of taught yourself, okay, when I raise the price, I lose people. When I lower the price, I gain people. If I want to, I can look at it on the chart down below. Okay, so now wait for the sun to come out, and now notice there's the sun there. When the sun comes out, the graph changes a little bit. Got it. I can define the term demand if I want to. I can, click on it, wait for the clouds. There, you can kind of go back and forth, which I think is always kind of fun. But basically got it. So now we've tested out the basic model here that we're talking about. Now we're giving you a little test here. I want to create a situation where the quantity of demand equals 7. Okay, so here's my situation. What I can do is I can change this. I can toggle the sun. I can raise the price and lower it. And so again, I'm not going through some great detail, but now you have to prove. Now you have to prove that you've learned something and demonstrate it. Mission accomplished. So that's a really nice, in my mind, it's just a really good example of a short sim. It's clean, it's simple, it's intuitive. It makes sense. Any questions about that one? And once again, I think it's incredibly important to show people short sims because, if you just talk about it, it just all kind of turns to gobbledygook. Okay, so this short sim and all the ones that I try to build follow 7 design principles. And these are really well thought out, and hopefully they'll be enduring. But one of the main things about any short sim is it builds confidence and conviction through player action. So in that example, I'm the one clicking stuff around, and I'm sort of learning about a demand curve and the notion of supply and demand or demand in regards to supply just through my own actions. And through that, I'm learning both things. One is competence, and competence is the ability to do the right thing. And the other is conviction, which is a real belief that this makes sense. And I think the notion of conviction is a really important stuff that a lot of educational material totally loses. Quick and easy to engage and hopefully replayable. Quick and easy to engage. There were no instructions. You didn't really have to think about it. It's all incredibly intuitive. Sure, a beverage truck or a food truck. Sure, customers, number of customers, demand. It's all intuitive. You don't have to think about it at all in any kind of significant way. It's also replayable. And this one perhaps less so, but it is something that you may want to pick up a second time or a third time and go through. Quick to build and easy to update. One of the giant problems with more elaborate computer games is that they're almost impossible to update once you build them, and they take forever to build. And so the notion is this is a really easy thing to build. Literally in this situation, the client did not like the graphics. A couple of weeks before it was due, and I could, you go in an afternoon and change all the graphics. So, it's sort of that kind of model. It does. Most short sims use a rigorous underlying model. What I like to say is, in a lot of cases, sims are sims of sims. Sims are themselves almost interactive prototypes of sims, not the sims themselves. But as long as you're rigorous about it, all the math works. You really have to think through everything as if you're planning a much more complicated computer game, and then do it there. Coexist with other educational content. Talked about that. Collaborative, not directive leadership. As much as possible, we are sharing the learning with the students. This is an opportunity to have the students not be told what to do, but to discover for themselves what to do. And that is just really, really important. The other thing I like to think about for the coach, I like to give my coaches sort of characters, but one of the great characters that I like to use is either Jarvis from the Iron Man movies or the Avengers movies in the Marvel universe, or Jeeves if you're from a little older and you perhaps like the Wodehouse novels. But, the quite smart, quite intelligent, but not really having direct power over you, and so is much more interested in shaping your opinion and shaping your experience, but in a much more collaborative way. And most importantly, or not most importantly, but really as importantly, simple mechanics and open-ended creativity. This stuff is not, there's nothing about that demand curve which is technologically impressive in any sense of the word. But it works, and it works because it's sort of clever and creative and sort of fun to engage. It's not, there's no bells and whistles, there's no rockets, there's no giant explosions or anything. It's just very, very clean design. I think that's the other really big part of these things. So another thing that short sims can do incredibly well is have you start from a different place. And it's a little hard to explain. I'll show you an example of it. So let's see if this works. Okay, so here's one on international trade. And one of the really weird things about learning about Econ 101's international trade is that it's not what you think it is. It's not international trade in the Econ 101 sense is not about, it's not the Donald Trump, we're going to call each other losers and criticize each other and try to get the best deal we possibly can. The notion of international trade in the traditional Econ 101 sense is everyone does what they do better. And so what I wanted to do in this first little short sim in introducing the concept of international trade is get students just to understand that. So here's a little short sim. So this person has 6 decisions. Okay, so imagine you and a friend are renting renting a house together, and you're planning to have a party in a week. And that's a situation. We're not even talking about international trading. And if someone says, isn't this sim supposed to be on international trade? We just kind of give the cryptic wax on, wax off. Obviously, a Danielson reference, but it's sort of, let's just get the muscle memory down. And so you and your housemates will go together for errands. Your housemate is local and drives more efficiently. Who should drive? So you can get to 4 stores in 2 hours. Your housemate can get to 5 stores in 2 hours. Who should drive? Well, of course, self-evident, absolutely obvious. Nothing could be more simple. My housemate will drive. So great. Now, another question. You two will spend Sunday afternoon working around the house, which is more productive for each of you to do. Same sort of basic situation. And so by what I'm doing, and so what I have is 6 of these together. Actually, this one, again, very easy. You can clean 2 rooms. Let's just do that one. Okay, here's another question for you. And each one's supposed to get a little harder. And then along the way, you're sort of teaching yourself the content. It's Monday afternoon. Suppose you could earn $10 an hour. Instead of working, you decide to rent a 2-hour movie for $5. How much does watching that movie cost? And so I actually love this little moment. To me, this is sort of a perfect short sim moment, even though it's not really a simulation, which is, here's a question. I can go on and on about opportunity costs. I can drivel on and on about, you need to take account of what things cost. Your own time, and your own time is important. But instead of doing all of that, I just short circuit it with one simple question. Again, Monday afternoon, you can earn $10 an hour. Instead of working, you'll rent a 2-hour movie for $5. How much does watching the movie cost? And so it gets to the absolute essence by answering the question, and no one gets this question wrong. But everyone has to think about it and sort of challenge their own assumptions about what work is. So to me, this is like an absolute perfect moment. I don't need to go through more of these, but it follows that path, and it gets a little more and more closer to how the problems are presented in a traditional Econ 101 thing. So it gets you there very gently. You're sort of discovering, you're almost inventing your own rules. And by having a series of questions that each one gets a little bit harder, and all along you're teaching yourself, it's a very effective way of learning and really knowing, really building conviction in what you're doing.
Hey, Clark, this is John. Say, do you need a second to stop the dinging, or?
I wish I could. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to fix it. I apologize greatly for that.
Sure. I mean, because we could certainly take a few minutes here and ask some questions while you throw it out the window.
Yeah.
So I'd like people to, if they could, ask questions here in terms of related to Clark's tenets of developing a short sim. If you do have a question, I think it would be worth sharing. I think you've got an idea of the kind of format that he uses. Essentially, there's two products on the market that allow you to rapidly build these short sims. One is called Branch Track, as you can see from his URLs. And the other is called iSpring, which many of you may already have. And what they do is they rely on, for the images, and you can take your own images, but both companies rely heavily on the eLearning Brothers library of images, as you can see here. And there's a lot of similarities because of it. And that gives you that, real life kind of feel without spending a lot of money on shooting video or shooting individuals. And so it's a really very quick and rapid way of developing these sims where learners are required to make decisions and go down branches. And on cue, it's beeping.
Yeah, sorry. I'm unfortunately in someone else's office right now and don't have the total people that otherwise would want to have. So I do apologize.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so those are all very simple models. I'm going to show you actually a very complicated model that breaks quite a few tenets of short sims. So it's not really a great example of a short sim, but it does show you a much more, a little more mathematically elaborate model. So in this case, it's working for a credit card company who wanted to get their new employees just to start thinking about credit cards and the roles that they have. And so this is a business simulation. In this simulation, you're a restaurateur, and so you have a couple of restaurants. In this case, you have three restaurants. Your current share price $2.99 a share, and you have 5 turns. So once again, it's pretty short, and this is a really cool sort of example of a business simulator that does not take very long to play, but you make a lot of really interesting decisions. So you have 5 turns left. And here, right now, you have 3 options. You can add another location. You can begin taking customer credit cards, or you can offer branded merchandise. And so, those are your 3 options. Okay, we're going to offer branded merchandise. So, okay, we're going to offer shirts and stuff, and it gives you a little bit of description about what you're doing as a result of that. Now back to Hub. So we've cost us a turn. We only have 4 turns left. Three locations. Okay, we're making a little more money, which is nice. And now we have 2 options. We can add another location, or we can begin taking customer credit cards. Let's do that. We have a bit of a choice. Do we want to sort of have the old-fashioned credit cards with like legacy terminals or the smart terminals? Again, here a little description on the smart terminals. So we're going to use those. So now we've opened up our own opportunities considerably, and we can begin taking mobile payments. We can offer prepackaged food. We can track user data. We can do a bunch of really kind of interesting things. So I'm going to start offering prepackaged food. Go back to the hub. Now I can apply for a branded credit card. I'm going to begin taking mobile payments. And now I can start doing things like using RFID for frictionless shopping, which sure, let's do that. And so, now I've sort of taken my store from, an old-fashioned kind of, restaurant to something that's pretty hip and pretty cool. So my share went up. At the end of the store, it has a number of stars, so it gives you a relative score, 3 stars out of 4. It also shows me how much I grew. You can have a leaderboard if this is a group, and we're going to try one more variation of this. We're going to try some different strategies. And what's so cool about this, again, is it doesn't take long, obviously, to play through an entire round. is effortless. It doesn't take any time at all. But you can start. So I'm going to start tracking user data. So I'm going to invest in big data, which is expensive initially. Now I can have a concierge service. I can offer branded merchandise. I'm going to do a concierge service. So offer higher value to my customers. I'm going to start launching a website to take orders. I'm going to add a food delivery option. So now I'm delivering food to people and that sort of that. So and then, again, not the best strategy. So what's really fun about that though is that, and again, in a very short time. Now from the customer perspective, what was really cool about that is it, in a very subtle way, and I wasn't lecturing at all, but you really start seeing how important credit cards are and how important the decisions around payment systems become in terms of opening up your own business opportunities. And so it's done in a very subtle way, but in a very kind of powerful way that it got you thinking about that. Any questions about any of that so far?
I have a question from Mona here.
Great.
When you say short sims, how short is short?
I think of between 5 and 12 minutes. So, it's not, it's like a short story. I mean, the definition of a short story tends to be, a story that you read in one sitting rather than a certain number of pages. So, it's kind of the one sitting thing. It's something that you can do at one time. But very specifically, I think of 5 to 12 minutes. Other questions? Okay, so one really great use of short sims, and for anyone who's starting to build their own, I really recommend this, is a simple process thing. So these things, variations of short sims are incredibly good at teaching processes. By processes, just sort of how to do things. Again, I'll give you an example of that in 1 minute. But the nice thing about processes is once you get good at teaching processes, the same basic model works for ethics, for cybersecurity, and then you can kind of get even more complicated from there. So it's a very nice example. All right, so here's how to do it, or here's how I do simple process short sims. I certainly start off. This is not a bad chart for most short sims, and again, like anything, your mileage may vary. The more involved a client is, they can easily add a lot of time to this. Art obviously adds a lot, but in terms of a basic chart, when I think of sims, so and this gets to the question to some degree of how short is a sim. You can have one level, you can have 4 levels, you can have 7 levels, or more than that. So I do think of levels, and a level is sort of one pass through. And so in sort of this generic model, I think of 4 steps. One is background research and high concept. One is creating the art and interface. And art can be a real pain to do, unfortunately. Adds a lot of time. One is structure and dialogue. And then one is sort of refining and reviewing. And so, if I have to look at my, what generally I like to plan for, it tends to be around these numbers. And again, do I ever hit this? No. Sometimes I'm under. More often than that, I'm perhaps over. But it's not a bad target for planning purposes. So the really important part is the SME interview, the subject matter expert interview, and it's a pretty simple. Ultimately, it's a very simple framework when you're talking to subject matter experts, especially on processes. And there's 2 basic questions to ask, which is, what is the process? How does the process look like when it's running smoothly? And then the second one is, what are common mistakes made in this area? And this is the biggest question. If I have to say, what's the one question that I use all the time for short sims? What are the common mistakes made in this area? What do people do that are mistakes? Why are they mistakes? Why did someone make the mistake? What happens when they make that mistake? I can ask a million questions just around the notion of common mistakes. But like with a computer game, the entire essence of a short sim is having interesting decisions and then ultimately making mistakes. And one of the things that I love about short sims over traditional educational media is the opportunity to allow people to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. And to, again, if you make a mistake, it's not just, you got it wrong. It's here's what happened. When you put that infected thumb drive into the computer, here's what happened. And maybe even have a quick diagram. But the notion of conviction building is totally predicated upon understanding why wrong things are wrong things. Once that's done, I record the interviews, and then I tend to break down the subject matter interviews, and I listen to them very carefully, and I try to take every statement they make and put it into one of these categories. And if I'm using a tool like Branch Track, then I'll actually do it in the tool itself, which saves a lot of time. So I try to identify the comments the subject matter experts make. Are these starting points? Are these broad categories of challenges? Are these successful outcomes? Are these unsuccessful outcomes? Are these moments of truth and interesting decision points? Are these milestones and influences? Are these things that just sort of happen, or are these interesting facts and phrases? And there's plenty of times when, the subject matter expert will say something that's sort of interesting. I can't work it into the simulation itself, but you can have it almost as a throwaway line. So I try to create in live time, almost like note cards where I use, in this case, Branch Track, and take all these comments. And then once you have the comments, you start organizing them chronologically, which kinds of things happen near the beginning of the process versus what kind of things that happened near the end of the process. So that's important. And then try to group them together. So you may have, and towards our earlier point, each one of these little segments here are kind of like levels. So in this case, this turned out to be a pretty long short sim. There's probably 10 levels. That was sort of a little more than I kind of like. But so here's an example of what this thinking can get to you. Sorry, let me find it here. That didn't work. Hold on. All right. Sorry, I'm going to try doing this a different way. Apologize. Directly on it. Okay, so here's an example of a process. Once again, we have the coach, and so this is about passport application. So this is teaching agents how to accept passports, and this is someone arrives, you greet the person, you take their application. In this case, you look first to see if the ink is black, not pink or light blue. The ink is indeed black, and so that's good. I didn't really want to make that an interactive moment. It did not seem interesting enough. So, you just kind of, in this case, you just sort of throw it in. In this case, again, the person is applying for a passport and has checked off passport card, not passport book. Just in case you don't know, passport cards are really good for taking things like cruises, for any kind of travel that's not involving airplanes, and passport books are necessary for air travel. And so, you start having a conversation. You can just accept it and move on, or you can start asking the applicant, well, you're getting a card, not a book. Is that correct? So we're going to confirm it first. Yeah, might as well do what's cheapest. And again, you can accept that, or again, keep sort of challenging it. Yeah, I'm just going to Mexico, so card is all I need. And in fact, you can get to Mexico with just a card through the border. Again, you're not doing any air travel. So you can accept that and move on, or you can keep pushing back. I have a new client in Mexico City. And so once again, you're saying, now sort of the right answer is, well, there'll probably be some flying involved if it's Mexico City. But even if you plan to drive, if there's ever an emergency, you want the option of flying home. So, that's sort of the real killer reason for it. But if you do just accept it, so your acceptance of the choice of passport card, and this is again explaining why wrong is wrong. Ultimately, it was the wrong product for the application or for the applicant. The applicant wound up missing several important events because of the choice, including emergency surgery for his son. He'll apply for a book a year from now. Still not your fault, but you could have done something better. So again, you can replay or move on, and then shows you where to cross out. So I'm going to skip over this part where you debate Social Security involvement, and I'll just show you one more moment here. Okay, so here's, again, the next part of the application. You see the place of birth. So place of birth, Colombia. And so, you kind of decide, well, is this a problem or not? And I'm not sure if any of you see the problem in this one or not, but there's a huge one. And so you can accept it and move on, in which case you'll be corrected, or you can start asking a question. You ask the applicant for his birthplace, and the applicant says quickly, oh, it's Columbia, Missouri. Okay, great. So do you accept that and move on, or do you challenge it a little bit? So we're going to challenge it. And so right now we're switching from just the binary option of challenging versus accepting to actually trying to identify the problem. What I'm using here is, again, very low tech, but very effective. Well, is Columbia the problem? No, something else. Is this part of the problem? And again, you can accept it or not. And so basically there's only 3 toggles. And so you're not ever going to get really lost, but you do have to have a bit of confidence to sort of know where the problem is. And so again, in this case, the problem is that, and this is where you can identify it. And so this ability to use a little red box or something to move around the screen and identify something can get you away from the person who's just guessing to then actually forcing them to demonstrate a bit of knowledge. Yes, this is where the problem is. Perfect, because the state abbreviation is not legible. There's a Columbia, Missouri, or there's a Columbia MO, Missouri, and a Columbia, Maryland. And you want to make sure that you pick the right one. So again, it's a really nice example of a process that gets just a little more interesting. And so the same framework works for ethics as well. And so again, as I'm creating through it, I end up with a whole list of my own pigeon language in terms of these are the little sims, these are the little moments that I'm working on. And you try to combine them as much as possible. You saw in that example with the guy with the passport, there's sort of one level, which is that guy, but it already hit 3 different learning moments or 3 different challenges in the context of this one level, which are different problems the person had, and then you can kind of work them through. And so again, as you're refining these simulations, you just start combining them as much as you can, creating narratives that connect them as much as you can, creating learning moments as often as you can. Any questions there?
I don't see any questions currently, but I'll let you know if any come through.
Great. And so this is very much just like writing. I mean, this is, at this point in the simulation, you're just going through it. It's like you're writing an essay or something. You're just smoothing everything out. You're adding little flourishes where you can. You're adding cool moments of interactivity where you can. Okay. So obviously, I recommend strongly everyone starts off with process sims. They're the most straightforward. In some cases, it really is a challenge to make them interesting, but almost always you can do that and put in really cool little moments where people understand why decisions are so important, and sort of cool kinds of interactions. So, but obviously, we want to move up from there to making kind of more and more elaborate examples. So, like with the demand curve example, like with the merchant restaurateur example, you do start wanting to get more powerful. So here's a list of sort of ways of getting into making more powerful short sims. The biggest question I always have to ask myself is literally who is doing the doing. A lot of content that you're given, there is no action associated with it. It's just sort of, here's a model, or, here's the way something works. And so you do have to work really hard to create a short sim to say, there's doing to be done and who is doing the doing. And
Hi, Clark.
Yep.
We have a question that came through if you have a second to answer it.
I absolutely do. Thank you.
Great. So the question is, would it be possible for you to discuss BranchTrack versus iSpring versus any other software, and what are strong points for each?
And so the one I used for the merchant one was Articulate, Articulate 360. And John, if you want to join in, you're very more than welcome to do that.
Sure. Well, don't you think that BranchTrack was first to market with this concept, and it probably has being first, they probably have a certain number of features that are unique to them. I think that iSpring we're taking a really close look at iSpring. I mean, let's face it, no platform is perfect, and they all have their pluses and minuses. But it's a matter of looking through in terms of what your needs are. For example, Clark, I know that clients have said to you, work in Storyline, period. And if Storyline has, it's ubiquitous, and you can make that work. And you can insert BranchTrack into Storyline, right?
You can probably. I have not done that yet. So
right. But you can. So what you're doing when you work in Storyline is you're basically taking your development process and applying it using the tools that Storyline gives you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Storyline is a much, much more powerful tool than BranchTrack, but it's also much more elaborate. BranchTrack is almost like a word processor. I mean, I really like BranchTrack because it's fast, it's easy, it's direct. It's just a very natural thing, and that's really important for a bunch of things. It's not only important because you want stuff to be easy, but as you're viewing and reviewing, it's like a word processor. You want to read what you wrote and then make little changes to it as you're reading. Versus Storyline, which is much more like you're compiling a small program, and so you can do a lot. There's no way I could do that business simulation in BranchTrack. It just would not be possible at all. However, Storyline, probably took me 4 or 5 times longer than BranchTrack, just from a development perspective, just because of the number of decisions you make. And at the same time, I never got the fluidity of BranchTrack, which means, once again, that it's just it feels a little stiffer. And so
and I think like what you could, BranchTrack is more of a mind mapping tool in the sense that it really I think it increases the level of brainstorming and quality because you're focused on the branches and what you're trying to do intellectually with the learner, the challenges you're providing the learner, whereas Storyline presents a lot of development hurdles. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's much more powerful. There's no question that you can do a lot more cool stuff with it, but it's gonna cost you in terms of time.
Right. And so I would say BranchTrack is a great tool for designing and iterating in. When we do workshops at conferences, within 2 hours, the attendees are creating a short sim. And that's not something that you could do with Storyline unless somebody was a really Storyline developer. I do want to say one thing about iSpring, because we're basically going to be using it for the work that we work with you, Clark, for the State Department. And essentially, what iSpring has done is made the investment in allowing you to put in code, XAPI commands, so that we can collect extreme amount of data from the iSpring story or branching story. I think that the other two softwares are probably going to get there, but I don't think they're as far along as iSpring is. And the beauty of collecting data through XAPI is, for an instructional designer, you really get, instant data into your learning record store as to what choices learners are making, what paths are either, working well or not working well. And then for the learner, you can at some point fairly easy set up a benchmark. In other words, how do you compare it to the other learners that have been through this simulation? And then for administrators, you're able to, show proof of the investment of the e-learning. In other words, you can show effectiveness easier than you can with other programs because of the data. And then ultimately, XAPI and iSpring will get you to the point where you can start adding on-the-job points that are collected. In the example of the State Department and passport acceptance agents, an agent may have a failed application, and that data can be collected via XAPI and then and then send that person to training. I'll let you take over here. I'm talking way too much, so thanks, Clark.
Not even close, not even possible. So I think Articulate again is a much bigger commitment of time and energy, but ultimately you can do much more powerful things. If your goal is something much more powerful, then it's great. Obviously, clients require certain things, and when clients require certain things, that's what you do. So in this case,
we have one more quick question from Christina. So, is it a problem to use more than one authoring tool within a learning module?
No, I think as John said, you can embed certain ones and other ones, and again, and in the context of doing a module, you can flip back and forth between them. So no, I don't think it's a problem at all. Other questions?
No more questions for now. Thanks, Clark.
Okay, so in the notion of building more powerful short sims, who's doing the doing is the biggest question. Obviously, then you have to kind of figure out what the situation is. Is it a metaphor? Is it a microcosm? And it really obviously should be highly visual and self-explanatory as much as possible. And so, I'll spend a day just sort of mulling over what is the right microcosm for this thing. And again, visual is great. Self-explanatory is great. What are the actions the player can do? And repetition is a plus. So, it's just a notion of what are the things that players can do. Think of a bunch of different endings. Again, one of the fun things about short sims that encourage replayability is this notion of different endings. Mock up the graphics. And again, one of the weird things about me, and there's plenty to be sure, but I decided to use PowerPoint and clip art as the primary kind of graphic engine. And again, that to me, I'm really, really good at PowerPoint from an entire lifetime of misspent activities. But so it's just, for me, it was the most fluid environment, especially when making kind of animation type things. And I'll show you that in 1 second. Use a coach character whenever you can. One of my great regrets about the business simulation is I did not use a coach character. And I think that sort of hurt the experience. Coaches are great. They welcome people in. They give feedback. They're just really, really nice. And I love the coach character a lot, especially again if you can give them a Jeeves or a Jarvis voice. And then at some point there's just going to be a grind, and I say that very specifically because you're not always 100% sure what's in your mind is going to work, but you just have to start plowing through create all the content, and there's a bit of faith involved in that. So here's the PowerPoint example. I use PowerPoint again in this case. This is for the demand curve. You throw people in, you have them moving, you plot out. So I do the sims, I do the graphics last. I go through all of the in this case, uh, um, branch track and create the situations and describe them verbally. And so I'll have a lot of notes to myself. Here's where there are 4 people. Here's where demand equals 3. Here's where demand equals 7, whatever. And so, I'll write out all the things and then have it, and then sort of fill in the graphics afterwards. One really nice trick to remember is when you're creating PowerPoint slides. So this is the final lab in the demand curve thing. It's only 22 screens, so it's it does it's less than you think, and you can trim that a little bit if you want. I like to give people plenty of options. So here's what it looks like. One thing I like to do though is use the same slide numbers in PowerPoint as the screen numbers in branch track. And that just makes lining them up and exporting a lot easier. And then at some point you just say, yes, I'm going to export every slide. So any questions there on kind of building a more complicated short sim? And again, it's kind of like writing where there's so many options that I'm overwhelmed by the number of options. But you can kind of start off with examples and people can copy them and hopefully make their own versions that are better.
We have a question specific to the software used.
Yes.
Elizabeth is asking, is iSpring intuitive to use like branch track, or does it require more training?
John?
I would say they're very similar. I haven't seen a difference in terms of being intuitive. And, it depends on, again, what you want to do ultimately. But I would take a good look at iSpring because it is ultimately started out as a PowerPoint conversion tool, very much like Storyline did with Articulate. So I think it's kind of the best of both worlds because you're getting a platform that is trying to be a lot of things to a lot of people, and so it's going to have a lot of features. So I don't see it as, when it comes to creating a branching story, any more difficult than branch track.
Great. I have not used it yet in a production sense, so I greatly look forward to learning that and exploring it for myself. And again, I almost inevitably with any tool, every tool has its own affordances, and one of the great joys of doing this is trying to exploit the things that each tool does well to do cool new things. And so, again, I can't wait to dive in. Other questions?
So Mona asks, what learning situations are not appropriate for short sims?
I think really open-ended kind of, where open-ended answers are needed. There's plenty of role-playing situations where, there ends up being a very open-ended discussion at the end, and short sims are terrible for open-ended conversations. So that's bad. I think short sims are good for small moments, and so in a lot of cases, if you have a lot of content, you have to break it up into smaller pieces. There's a lot. I honestly think there's plenty of times where video is great and video is better than short sims. I think there's plenty of times when straight text is better and certainly cheaper than short sims. I think a recipe or something. If here's the 10 steps for here's 10 steps you have to follow in order to not cut off your hands when you're making drugs in your Bayer facility. I think a good poster is better. I in my mind, you sort of take all of these great learning tools that we have, from handout cards and reminders to things on people's computer screens that are reminders, to books, to short stories, to whatever, to videos, to audio clips, to great diagrams. I think they all do things well. I think the important thing about short sims is that you kind of get good at them and you kind of work them into the mix and use them especially conviction building. I mean, I really like short sims for teaching people, in some cases, how to do something, but really why it's important, why you should care, that you should care. I think that's really, really where they shine. But again, I think all of us need to get good at a bunch of different tools so that we can combine them effortlessly for which ones do whatever better.
Great. So James is wondering, is there a difference between sims and scenarios?
You can tie yourself up forever in the language. So I sort of stuck my own little finger in the ground regarding calling these things sims and then ultimately short sims a while ago. I mean, but I think you can call them whatever you want. I think there's no perfect definition. And when you get serious games versus is this consider is this gaming something? Is this gamification? It can be, but it's not necessarily. So if you sort of look at how a lot of these things play out, I do look at each of these little quarters as levels. And so this sim has sort of 10 levels. Some levels are long, some levels are short. Hopefully they go from short to long as much as possible, like a good game design. But each level itself, may have 3 or 4 components to it. So, I think the language is fairly imprecise at this point. And again, a level can be one screen. In that early example I showed you of the, you and your housemate are planning a party. Well, conceivably each one of those screens is a level, except, it's just one screen. So it's not necessarily a hard level or a complicated level. So I think sims and scenarios can easily be used interchangeable. Although for me, sims and short sims has a very pedagogical component to it that I find valuable and interactive component. Scenarios to me is a bit passive in terms of, here is a scenario, let me explain it to you, rather than here's a sim where you're going to control the situation. Other questions? So I think go.
Is it a best practice to cover the learning material in another format before launching the sim, or is the sim the sole concept for learning?
You should be able to cover material in the short sim that you don't need to cover through other things. So I think it's a good example. I don't, I really like having people teach themselves stuff. Now, what you may want to do is have some kind of text at the end saying, in case you didn't learn it, here's what it is. But I would have this, depending on the material, I would rather have, in most cases, the sim first and then the material. What you may want to do is have some traditional linear presentation material and then have the short sim take it in a new direction. So let's see how well you can improvise with what you've learned. So
right, and I think, Clark, I think the bottom line too is that we want to have more action from the learner, more doing, as opposed to just reading pages on the internet. And so, getting involved in a sim gets them engaged in a more fun and engaging way, and you can always reference, read more here, read this manual, that kind of thing. The other thing I think that people should keep in mind is that if they're having difficulty convincing management to go the short sim route, one way to introduce them is make your assessments focused on sims. In other words, use it as a way, as a check on learning, or even as a testing methodology. So they're being tested within a real situation.
Yep. Other questions? So again, the biggest thing is right now I feel like to some degree the short sim framework is like talking about writing. So here's this word processor. Well, what can you do? Well, you can write limericks, and you can write, timelines and recipes. The truth is this stuff is so open-ended. It's staggering. And I know that there'll be people who, you know, we're right at the beginning of this, in my opinion, revolution of interactive content where people can teach themselves, people can control it, people, you know, we're gonna see all kinds of really cool things. So this is a, you know, I can show you, and I do hope you like the book. The book has a bunch of different kinds of interactivities and a lot of techniques. It goes into all this stuff in a lot more detail. You know, but again, it's like saying, you know, here's a book on writing, and, you know, here's, you know, 5 genres. You can write a novel, you can write a short story, you can write a timeline, you can write a limerick, you can, you know, write a haiku, you can whatever. And, you know, the truth is that this stuff is whatever we want it to be. We can make the interface look like anything. We can make the graphics be anything we want. We can make the material be as, you know, as complicated or as simple as we want. And so, you know, it's staggering. That's why you sort of take a few short things first. But I think the truth is that we're right at the beginning of a really kind of cool time frame when I think educational media is going to go through a rapid translation as it starts incorporating this kind of much more engaging and I think much more powerful and frankly friendlier and more comforting, and it doesn't burn people out as much. So I think that the advantages are really extraordinary. Thank you all.
Thank you, Clark.
My pleasure.
Then we'll be wrapping up, and we want to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and we will be following up with an email including resources like the recorded webinar and the link to Clark's book. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending.